Welcome to English 430 and 560. These are the podcasts for Shakespeare's drama, produced by and starring Dr. Bill Dines.
Cataracts and hurricanes, spout till you have drenched our steeples, drowned the cocks. You sulphurous and thought-executing fires, vaunt couriers of oak, cleaving thunderbolts, singe my white head, and thou, all shaking thunder, strike flat the thick rotundity of the world, crack nature's molds, all germens spill at once, that makes ingrateful man.
That's Paul Scofield performing as King Lear. The storm on the heath in Act 3 is the centerpiece of the play, both in time and in space, and it presents an excellent metaphor, both for the tumult of the action and for the tension between the inner self and the exterior world that's so important to the themes of this play. The storm may have been difficult to perform on the stage of the Globe Theatre around 3 or 4 o'clock on a London afternoon. But remember that the audience wasn't looking for physical realism the same way we are today. Archaeological excavation at the Rose Theatre, about 50 yards away from where the original Globe stood, revealed wooden shafts down which heavy metal balls could be rolled to simulate the sound of thunder. But the audience wouldn't have minded if Burbage wasn't getting soaked to the skin by the rain, as he railed against the gods. What mattered was the imposing image of one man physically and psychologically battered, yet somehow still unbowed, persevering against everything. But not alone, because there's still that frightened, faithful companion huddled next to him. It's worth saying a word or two about the structure of the play. Coleridge praised its plot, and it's the most successful and complete example of the connection between the primary and the secondary plot in all of Shakespeare. At the same time, the heart of the play is very simple and direct as a fairy tale. Once upon a time, there was a king with 3 daughters. One of the things we'll be noticing as we move into the later stages of Shakespeare's career is his tendency to move away from plot and character towards spectacle and idea. Now, that's not to say that nothing happens or that characters become simply two-dimensional cardboard cutouts in the later plays. But Shakespeare does seem to spend a little bit less time worrying about psychologically consistent backstories, even for his principal characters, and he seems less interested in elaborate plot structures. As we work through the remaining plays of our semester, we might ask what it was that Shakespeare found limiting or frustrating about those elements, and to what he was turning instead. If Shakespeare was working on this play in 1604, 1605, as seems likely, his elder daughter, Susanna, was about 21 or 22 years old. His younger daughter, Judith, was around 20. His son, Hamnet, Judith's twin, had been dead for about 9 years. One of the most important themes of the play, clearly, is the relationship between parents and children. And let me draw your attention to 2 early moments in the play that really helped generate this. One of those moments is Gloucester's introduction of his son Edmund to the Earl of Kent at the very start of the play. Now, Gloucester's attitude strikes us today as thoughtless macho posturing, and I don't want to defend him very much. But it's worth keeping in mind that Gloucester has no legal obligation to acknowledge the bastard at all. And I think there's some evidence of some pride and even affection underneath the bluff surface of his remarks. It's interesting to watch the actor playing Edmund in this moment. How does he react to what his father is saying? Is he shocked and embarrassed by Dad? Or is this the sort of treatment that he's come to expect? Clearly, this is a scene designed to jolt us out of our comfortable stereotypes, about that relationship between father and son. Then just a few minutes of stage time later, we have Lear's little game with his daughters. Who loves me most? The moment when he turns to Cordelia and asks what she can say is perhaps the single most critical moment in the play, and it's hard to find its equal in any of Shakespeare's plays. Why doesn't she have anything to say? It's easy enough to blame Lear for this mess, and again, I don't want to pretend that it's not his fault. It's a silly thing for a king to do, and it's especially in public, especially in the middle of a formal and important ceremony. Yet Cordelia's insistence that her own honesty matters more than her father's public image, or their own private relationship, is extreme in its own right, isn't it? Anyone who's never told a little white lie to make someone else feel better is free to give Cordelia a pass on this one. But the rest of us have to wonder why she makes the choice that she does. The other important theme that I'd like you to be thinking about as you read is again the question of identity. What makes us who we are? Certainly this is a question we've been exploring ever since the semester began. When Puck dropped that potion in Lysander's eyes and tricked him into loving Helena, Hermia was shaken to her core, asking, "Am I not Hermia? Are you not Lysander?" Check out Act 3, Scene 2 of A Midsummer Night's Dream if you don't believe me. But in Act 1, Scene 4 of King Lear, the stakes are a lot higher than they were for that love-struck teenager.
Does any here know me? This is not Lear. Does Lear walk thus, speak thus? Where are his eyes? Who is it who can tell me who I am?
Lear's shadow.
As Lear's daughters turn against him, his sense of his own fundamental identity begins to crumble, leading inexorably to that terrifying moment out on the heath in the storm. How much of our sense of self is bound up in family and other personal relationships? How much of who I am depends upon my roles as somebody's husband, somebody's father, somebody's son? I don't think any of us would disagree that family is central to our sense of identity. But that's just the beginning for Lear. His strife with his daughters begins when he tries to give up his role as king. But how can you surrender an identity that has been given to you by God and by nature? It's difficult, I think, for a modern audience raised in a democratic system to sympathize with the depth of feeling that the notion of kingship must have raised for Shakespeare's audience. King James, who had come to the English throne in 1603 following Elizabeth's death, had been interested in revitalizing the notion of royalty as divinely appointed, divinely inspired, even before the turn of the century when he was still King of Scotland. And he vigorously pursued that line after coming to London. In 1612, he reissued a book that he had first written at the end of the 1590s, titled Basilicon Doron, The Kingly Gift. It was designed as advice to his own son, and in it James emphasizes both the monarch's responsibility to God and the monarch's status as God's representative on earth. Quote, "Therefore, my son, first of all things, learn to know and love that God to whom ye have a double obligation. First, for that he made you a man, and next, for that he made you a little God, to sit on his throne and rule over other men. Remember that as in dignity he hath erected you above others, so ought ye in thankfulness towards him go as far beyond all others." End quote. That image of the king as a little god goes a long way, I think, to helping us understand why Lear's attempt to retire has had such drastic consequences. How can you stop being something that you fundamentally are? Can you stop being a king just because you don't want the responsibilities anymore? Can you stop being a father just because your kids are all grown up and have castles of their own now? And the peeling away doesn't end there. As Lear's public identities and his family identities are stripped away, his physical and his psychological integrity begin to come apart too. Listen for his references to his bodily health, and watch the way these parallel his emotional collapse. By the time we reach that stormy heath, everything Lear has become fractured. And that's when he meets poor Tom, the disguised Edgar, son of Gloucester. James had one other bit of advice for his son that is relevant here. "Think not," he wrote, "that the highness of your dignity diminisheth your faults, much less giveth you a license to sin. But by the contrary, your fault shall be aggravated according to the height of your dignity. Any sin that you commit, not being a single sin, procuring but the fault of one, but being an exemplary sin, and therefore draweth with it the whole multitude to be guilty of the same." End quote. Lear's sins are very personal ones, as are Gloucester's. But those sins wind up having consequences that shape the entire fabric of their communities. As events quickly spin out of control, I'll ask you to keep at least one eye on the characters who stick by Lear. Characters like Kent and the Fool and Cordelia herself. And watch those characters who have to make choices, who see the growing chasm and have to decide which side they want to stand on. What choices do men like Albany and Cornwall make when they have the opportunity? Finally, the play forces us again to confront the very nature of evil. We've encountered this problem before in the nearly motiveless cruelty of Iago. But here we face it, I think, in an even more vicious and horrifying ways. Can we explain the choices Edmund, Goneril, and Regan make? And if we can't explain them, where does that leave us?